What I'm going to do, that means at this moment, I'm representing Thupten Nobuling, and I'm going to make a mandala offering, and we're going to make this mandala offering to the Buddha as if the Buddha were here himself, and of course the Buddha is, we're just not clairvoyant, we can't see, and we're going to make a request to the Buddha for the teaching. It's so auspicious to do that, and we're going to offer the entire universe. So use your creative imagination, please. We're offering everything in the universe, all the most marvelous things that beings use that make them happy. We're going to pile them up and make this marvelous offering to the Buddha as a request for the teaching. It's so auspicious, okay? We'll start with that. Saji perki jogshing metog tramri rablingji ni de genpadi sange jingdu mikte ulwai drokon namdag jingla chepashok idam guru ratna mandalakam niryatayami. So now we will sing our little prayer. There's two parts to the prayer. The first part is for those of us who already identify with being a Buddhist. So it's reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines are expressing, the Lamas would say, it's we're setting our motivation. I mean, we might say we're stating our purpose. Why are we here together for this 90 minutes, you know? It's to listen to these teachings. Why? So that we can get tools from it to help us develop our amazing potential. Why? So that we can be happy, but so that we can also help others. Lead them to enlightenment as well. That's the long term, the biggest motivation of all. And that's what the second two lines are expressing. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badhu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badhu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho badu dagni kyapsuchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. Okay, Mary, thank you. All right. So dependent arising. As His Holiness sometimes says, it's the Buddhist slogan, you know. It's how things exist conventionally. So as Lama Yeshe says, you know, paraphrasing Lama Tsongkhapa, that dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. And that's the ultimate way that things exist. So this is the best framework. For Tsongkhapa, this is the perfect framework for us understanding how things exist. So, of course, it sounds a bit abstract. We think, well, why on earth do I want to know how things exist? I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a scientist. Do I need to be? And Buddha says, yes. Why? Because he's very simply saying that we suffer because we're not in touch with how things exist. So the teachings about emptiness, you know, the dependent arising and being the logic that proves emptiness, these come at the end of the path. If you're on the Mahayana path, and we look at Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim, this wonderful packaging of all the Buddha's teachings from A to Z, presented in a nice orderly way, orderly psychologically, in terms of your capacity to internalize the information. Just like it would be if you're learning cooking or music. You start at the simple stuff, and you move to the middle stuff, and you go to the higher stuff, and then you graduate. Well, here we're trying to graduate as a Buddha, okay? So then we look at the way that the teachings are constructed, the practices are constructed in a nice orderly way. So if we want to realize emptiness, which is the way to get out of samsara, then that's a teaching actually that belongs, if we look at the Lam Rim, you've got the first scope of teachings, which is all the teachings about how to abide by the laws of karma. Why? Because Buddha says every millisecond of what we think and do and say programs us and produces the person we become. We are our own creators. Self-creation is one way His Holiness sometimes refers to this natural law of karma. So this very first level of practice, Buddha says, given that we're all kind of driven by these crazy delusions, the very first level of practice is control the servants of these delusions, which is your body and speech. So he exhorts us to not kill, not steal, not lie. This gets us really grounded, disciplined, and we slowly learn to realize that we're doing this because we are sick of suffering and we don't want future suffering. That's our first level of practice. Then we go to the next level, which is like the middle scope, and I like to call these junior school and high school. It's a really good analogy. Here now we get to the root of the problem, and we look into the mind itself. We look into we begin to identify, we begin to distinguish between, in this chaos of our mind, we distinguish between the delusions, the neurotic states of mind, the mental afflictions, as Buddha calls them, and the valid states of mind, the virtuous states of mind. This is taking the Buddhist model of the mind that's it's unique to the Buddha. He distinguishes between the neurotic, ridiculous, I-based, fear-based, miserable, neurotic states of mind and the valid, reasonable, useful states of mind, like love and compassion and wisdom, etc. It's a really precise point that Buddha makes, and it's quite unique to the Buddha, this distinction between these states of mind, these emotions that we all have, that for us right now, a big soup of emotion. We can't tell one bit from another. This is our next job. So if we wanted to graduate there, if we were on the Hinayana path, the Theravadan path, we would graduate at this. We would then add to that job of controlling our body, speech, and mind. We would then, by giving up harming others, by giving up taking refuge, purifying our minds, going to high school, learning about the delusions, giving up attachment, and then we would realize emptiness. And eventually, at one life or other, we would have realized emptiness. We would have cut the root of delusions, achieved our own liberation, achieved our own nirvana, and then when we die, we're out of here, baby. We don't come back. Then you graduate at high school. You graduate at the middle scope, if you like. But if we're on the Mahayana path, which is the framework of our path, we continue on. And we go to the Bodhisattva path. We add the compassion wing. The first lot is the wisdom wing, and now we've got the compassion wing. So emptiness itself is a Hinayana teaching. Emptiness itself belongs to the middle scope. But in the Mahayana path, it's left until we get to the compassion wing, and it's taught at the final stages of the path of the Bodhisattva. When once we've accomplished bodhicitta, then the next level, the final stages of our practice, is to practice the 6 perfections. So the first 4 of those are what we do from life after life after life as a bodhisattva in relation to sentient beings. We're perfecting the compassion wing. We practice morality and generosity and patience and perseverance in day-to-day life, bopping around life after life, connecting with sentient beings, practicing all these 4, perfecting the compassion wing, and then we now perfect the wisdom wing by the last 2 perfections called where we develop concentration meditation, known as calm abiding, the 5th of the 6 perfections, which itself too is not even it's not even a Buddhist teaching. This comes from the Hindus before. Buddha very happily took this technique with him when he diverged in his own direction. So that's here, we practice that here, and then we practice the 6th perfection on the basis of calm abiding. We then get insight into emptiness. And that's where the teachings on emptiness are taught, in the framework of the Mahayana path, in the framework of the 6 perfections. So and the point is this because this path is, any path, any body of knowledge that you're practicing, if you're studying, you want to become a physicist, you begin at junior school and you start to learn math. Then you start to add all the components. And you know very well, in the beginning, you might not know it because you're just a little kid and you don't know what you're doing. But when you look back on what you've learned, you see that every single thing you learned in junior school, in high school, in university is leading you to become a physicist. Everything is programmed to help you do that. When you're learning music, you study all the scales, all the different things. Everything is leading you to play Bach. So if it's a coherent body of knowledge, it's a coherent system of learning from junior school to high school to university to postgraduate. Every body of knowledge is like that. Same here. So this often surprises us. Because it's a spiritual path and we don't think of it in such a coherent way, but that's exactly what this Lamrim is. And it mightn't be so evident. I know when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa, I did not have a clue in heaven what Lama Zopa was talking about. I could see no logic to any of it. It seems this random series of these disconnected ideas, But as we keep practicing and learning, we start to join the dots, don't we? We start to see that it's an entire map. And then you look back. So when we get to emptiness, we then can look back and realize everything we learned in junior school about karma is preparing us for understanding emptiness. Everything we learned in high school about the mind is preparing us for understanding emptiness. So how is like this? In junior school, the first level, the first scope, because we're all driven by the crazy delusions, Buddha says, which are leading us up garden paths and causing us suffering, he doesn't start to get us to even to look into our mind yet. He gets us to control the servants of our mind, like I said. Control your body, control your speech. Don't harm others, baby. The very minimum first level of practice. Why not, Buddha? Because guess what, Robina? Everything you think and do and say programs your mind, sows seeds in your mind that will ripen as your future suffering and happiness. Do you want suffering, Robina? No, thank you. Well then, honey, honey, stop causing it. Stop killing, stealing, lying, jumping on the wrong partner, etc., etc. That's our first level of practice. Now, the explicit teaching there is to control your body and speech so you don't harm others for your own sake. But the implicit teaching is the teaching about dependent arising. When we get to emptiness, which we're in a second, you learn there are hundreds of ways in which things exist interdependently. But Buddha pinpoints 3 particular ways in relation to realizing emptiness at 3 levels of dependent arising. The first one, the grossest level, the simplest one, is that everything that exists impermanent comes into existence in dependence upon causes. Well, in the very first level of practice, the explicit teaching is discipline, control your body and speech, don't harm others, live in vows and purify. That's the explicit teaching. But implicitly, as we develop on the path, we will realize that the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, is a perfect example of the first level of dependent arising. That this person whom I thought was just this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born, who's the product of mummy or daddy or a creator, and it's not my fault, and and I'm just sitting here, this innocent victim. That's how we feel now because of the misconceptions we have. But when we learn about karma, what it does is make us accountable, get us to realize that I am the product of my own past actions. That's cause and effect. And that already, this is the implicit teaching, helps me loosen the grip of ego grasping and loosen the grip and get me to become more accountable, more understanding that I am the cause of my happiness and I am the cause of my suffering. This is helping me understand emptiness, although it's not, as I said, it's not explicit at that point, but we begin to learn that. Now I get to high school, now I start to look into what the delusions are, and this is the clear point. When we learn the Buddhist model of the mind, we learn there are 2 main characteristics of the neurotic states of mind, these afflictions. This is the term they use in Sanskrit, klesha, and the term we generally translate is the term affliction. Well, it's a very arcane word. We don't use it much in our culture. I could see when I edit Lama Yeshe, he from the very beginning of meeting hippies back in the 60s, he just kind of intuitively knew the words we did use. He was really like he was born a hippie. He just understood the language we use. It was quite amazing. He never uses in his teachings the word affliction, which is the classic word all Buddhist teachers use because it's the classic word in Sanskrit and then translated into Tibetan. But I mean, for me, we don't use it in our life. Who says I have an affliction? Nobody. It's very old-fashioned. So what is an affliction? Well, it's a mental affliction. It means it's part of the mind. What is an example of a mental affliction? Well, Buddha states the 3 poisons, the 3 toxic emotions. He actually talks about 84,000 of them, but they all subsume to these 3. Ego grasping, and there's a hierarchical relationship between them. So in this level of practice, we're not discussing emptiness yet, but what I'm going to tell you, again, is implicit in this level of practice. The explicit teaching is that these are states of mind, ego grasping that clings to the neurotic I, attachment, that is this emotional junkie in there that is desperate to always get what I want, and then it has a panic attack of anger or depression when it doesn't get what it wants, and then all the other delusions branch out from there, like pride and all the other rubbish. The main character we learn about these states of mind at that level of practice in the middle scope is that they're deeply disturbing. This is what Buddha's trying to get us to see. That attachment and anger and depression and anxiety are deeply disturbing, that they are the source of our pain and suffering. This is Buddha's expertise. He gets us to try and recognize these states of mind and to see how they break our hearts. That's the explicit teaching here. But because, and this is one of the terms used virtually as a synonym, they are disturbing emotions. Disturbing for whom? Yeah, the person you punch, but guess what, honey? For yourself. And this is the part that's so hard for us because we are completely addicted to believing that, again, it's not my fault. I'm angry because my boyfriend was mean to me. He's the problem, not me. But once we've started to understand karma and we begin to take responsibility, that loosens the grip of ego grasping. Now we get to become familiar with our states of mind and see the disturbing nature of them, which is the explicit teaching. So naturally you want to give them up. Who wants to suffer? Not me. So I'm going to try and give up depression, give up anger. And that's the unique job that Buddha gives us. And he gives us the expertise to do it. Not give up the boyfriend. Yeah, give up as well. Fine, give up the boyfriend, but finally give up the attachment, give up the anger, give up the depression. This is outrageous for us in our culture because we think we are these innocent victims whom events and people harm. I can't help it. I'm depressed because of this. I'm angry because of that. But when we start to learn the deeper meaning of these, and this is the implicit teaching in the second scope that leads us to understand emptiness, is that the real function of these neurotic states of mind, the real function of these disturbing emotions, why they are the cause of suffering, and this is hard for us to get because it's not our culture, is that they are misconceptions. When we learn the epistemological model of the mind in Buddhism, we're going to learn that there are two levels at which our mental consciousness functions. And the subtle one is called where you have perception. That is like a more subtle level of mind when we've accomplished meditation, and we can have a direct experience of something. But this level we function at the moment is conceptual, and that's a big surprise for us. When we think of conceptual, we think it's just the thoughts. But for the Buddha, even the emotions, which we are so caught up in, so buying into, our emotions are rooted in being conceptions, but they are misconceptions. The negative ones are misconceptions. We also have love and compassion. They're valid conceptions, relatively speaking, but all of our emotions are just the kind of the grosser expression of these more subtle millions of different conceptual stories that drive our minds every second. So when we start by controlling our body and speech, we then can begin to look into the mind and start to see our mind, see the thousands of thoughts before they express themselves out of our mouth, before I punch my boyfriend. But our trouble in our culture is we only pay attention when the body is involved, and that's our tragedy. So at the second level of practice, when we start to see the explicit meaning of these disturbing emotions, we then can also begin to understand how anger, attachment, jealousy, anxiety, pride, ego grasping, all of them are literally conceptual stories deep in our bones from countless lives of practice, and that they're all conceptual elaborations. They are embellishments. As Lama Zopa says, you know, all these conceptual stories, all of the neurotic ones, decorate on top of what is there, layer upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. And that's the key point. And that is getting us even closer to when we now get to dependent arising and emptiness, which we're going to get into. Our minds now understand that the function of all the misconceptions, and when we get to dependent arising and emptiness, we're trying to attack the root delusion, the root affliction, the root neurosis, which is the subtlest, most primordial of all, known as ignorance, ego grasping, that clings to and believes totally in the fantasy I. But we learn already implicitly from understanding the delusions, the disturbing emotions, that they are conceptual stories. This leads us to now be able to begin to really understand. Our minds are ready to now to start listening to dependent arising and understanding and beginning to understand emptiness. If we try to leap into this first, we can if we're very intelligent, but it's very difficult because we have to know Buddha's particular view of the mind. It's a very specific model, quite unique to the Buddha, you know. So if we've done any work at the first level, controlled our body and speech and lived in vows and done purification, then we can begin to loosen the grip of ego grasping, become more courageous. Then we get to the second level, we start to identify our delusions. And this is where we really become a Buddhist. This is where we really become a Buddhist, okay? Start to identify our delusions and see how they cause me suffering, see how they're misconceptions, and want to give them up. This is profound. Now we're ready to get to the Bodhisattva path and add compassion to the mix, and then we can get to the 6 perfections and get to the final 2 and really start to unpack and unravel the chaos of this mind and get real wisdom. Finally get to realize what does exist and how things exist. Everything leads us to that, you know. So now let's look at that. Buddha's telling us, like I said, as Lama Zopa says, all these delusions, all these misconceptions, all these afflictions, starting with the 3 poisons, starting with ego grasping. This is a colloquial term for the root delusion, the root affliction, the root mental illness, the root neurosis, called literally ignorance. But it's a very specific ignorance, colloquially known as ego grasping. It's a very interesting, it's a very delicious title. That gives rise to attachment to get what that fantasy I wants, and then that gives rise to anger when it doesn't get what it wants, and that gives rise to all the other dramas, you know. So it's a real hierarchical relationship, a very specific, very close relationship between these 3. So now in the second scope, in high school, we learn about attachment and aversion. Now let's look at ego grasping, the root delusion, the root lie, the root misconception. such that when we uproot it, that's the beginning of the end of suffering. That's when we realize emptiness, quote unquote. Okay. So let's understand this ignorance. It's such a simple word, ignorance, but this is a very specific ignorance, precise and clear. So it's like, simple ignorance. If you say to me, what's that, Robina? And I'd say, I don't know. That's very simple ignorance, isn't it? Or what color is that? And I'll say, I don't know. That's ordinary ignorance. So then that ignorance is easy to fix because I don't know what it is. So you simply tell me that color is called black, Robina. I'll go, thank you very much. Now I know. That's easy. If we had that level of ignorance only, we could get enlightened in a couple of years because we're very intelligent. But that's not the problem. So the Buddha's saying, not only do we not know that that's black, and there's a simple analogy, but I've got a misconception that thinks it's something else. So let's just say I think it's pink. Not so that the real ignorance here in the simple analogy is I'm addicted because I believed it for so long. I'm addicted to believing that that is pink. So not only do I not know it's black, I think it's something else, and I believe 1,000,000,000% in that lie. That's the problem of the ignorance. And so the ignorance here, obviously, is not only do I not know the how I exist, not only do I not know the nature of how things exist, that they're interdependent, that they're dependent arisings. Not only do I not know that, but the ignorance believes in the exact opposite. And we have believed in the exact opposite, that there is here somewhere a real, definite, independent I. And we have believed in this for eons, Buddha says. And we grasp at it with the most frantic fear. Fear is the nature of this ignorance, this ego grasping. So not only do we not know what the I is, we have a complete fantasy that we have made up that's not even slightly different, but the exact opposite of the truth. And we cling to it like vampires. And it's profoundly the truth for us now. So strongly have we believed in this ego grasping's view that there is an independent I in here, so strongly we have been grasping at that for eons in all our lives of existence, that everything even appears 100% as if it is inherent, as if it is existing from its own side, as if it is independent. So this is why it is so hard to remove from the mind, It's primordial. So the Buddha's saying, he tells us this is how things do exist. He gets us to know that. And the hard work is to start to unpack that. So one of the most marvelous ways to do this, according to Tsongkhapa, is in the framework of learning the two truths. Okay? So one is called the conventional reality, how things exist conventionally. And the shorthand for that is dependent arising. Then you've got how things, the other truth, if you like, is how things exist ultimately, finally. And the shorthand for that is the word emptiness. So right now, Buddha says, when we hear, let's say, we can use all phenomena, Buddha says, all phenomena that exist in the universe, without exception, exist within the framework of these two truths. Everything that exists has a conventional character, and ultimately is empty of existing from its own side. We're going to go into these terms, okay? So right now, when we hear that the I is empty of existing from its own side, one of the various synonyms that is used. The I lacks, there's many synonyms for how things do exist. Buddha tells us things do not have what things lack. The word emptiness is it means something is lacking. The word emptiness is very simple. It's just a noun referring to the absence of something. If there's no tea in my cup and I'm expecting tea, I will say that my cup is empty. Empty of what? In this case, of tea. If there's no money in my bank and I'm expecting money and I get a shock when I see it, what is my bank account empty of? It's empty of money. If I'm looking for Fred in the room and I walk in the room and there's no one there, I'll say the room is empty. So we know this phrase, it's very comfortable. So, but Buddha's telling us that, in fact, that we believe in an intrinsic I. We believe in an independent I. We don't think we do that. No one ever taught us this. Because it's so primordial, we don't notice we believe in that. It sounds like a joke to us. Whoever thought they believed there was an intrinsic I in there? It's like crazy. But that's what we're doing. So Buddha's identifying our mistake. The mistake of ignorance is to believe that in here somewhere there is a real, findable little I that's independent in different levels. We're going to go into this. And he says that I doesn't exist in there, Robina. That I is... within here, that I is lacking. That is empty. It doesn't exist. That I doesn't exist. So when we hear that there is no I from its own side, this is one of the many phrases used. Buddha tells us there's nothing that exists from its own side. There is nothing that exists independently. There is nothing that exists in and of itself. There is nothing that exists intrinsically, independently, inherently. There are many synonyms. They all refer to the word independent. So it's a crucial word to understand. So when we hear there is no I existing from its own side, there is no cup existing from its own side, because we don't understand the meaning, and because what right now we have a wrong view in the mind, Buddha says, which we've been believing in for eons. So as soon as we hear there is no I from its own side, there is no cup from its own side, we immediately throw the baby out of the bathwater and we leap into the extreme view, or as Tsongkhapa says, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake, and we hear there is no I, period. Oh, I might as well kill myself. There is no I. That's an extreme view. It's a wrong view. We go too far. We throw out too much, and we do that automatically. And this is the major mistake that in interpretations in all the literature and over the centuries, the main mistake that we make when we hear that there is no I from its own side, we make the mistake of saying there is no I. We fall into the trap of nihilism. So that's the wrong view, and we do that automatically. We will say, oh, well, it's all empty, so it doesn't matter anyway. That is a complete mistake. That's falling into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says. So that's why he's presenting emptiness in the framework of conventional reality, in the framework of the two truths, because this is a way to guarantee we don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake. So our trouble is right now, because we have ignorance, maripa, unawareness, ignorance, known colloquially as ego grasping. As soon as we hear there is no I from its own side, we think, oh, well, there's no I. That's the first mistake we make. But then we hear dependent arising. But there is an I, Buddha says, that does exist in dependence upon various factors. So as soon as we hear that, we get overexcited and we add on, we embellish that. In this first one, we underestimate the I, and now we overestimate, and we add bells and whistles onto it, and we think, oh, thank God, there is an I after all. Grasp. This is the other extreme view, which is called the eternalistic view. So in this view, which is the view we run to when we hear that there is something existing, dependent, arising, we can't help but to see it as inherent, as real, as solid, as pointable. Now, this is the view that Buddha's arguing with. He diverged from the Hindus, who did find these great yogis before the Buddha, these amazing geniuses who created single point of concentration, who mapped the mind, who discovered the mind internally. They're incredible geniuses. They went as far as they could go. They gave up emptiness. They gave up all the delusions. They gave up all the, all the rubbish. They abided by the law of karma, but they came to a conclusion that there is some kind of essential self there that does exist inherently. So there's various levels of that understanding. Well, that's where Buddha got to as far as he could, and then he went further. He said, no, there is no such thing. So that's where he diverged in his own direction. Then over the years of all these different Buddhist interpretations, there's many variations of the interpretations of this emptiness. And this is when you learn Buddhist tenets, you learn about this. So the view we're discussing here is said to be the final meaning of the Buddha, and it's in terms of the Madhyamika Prasangika view, the middle way view, and the consequentialist. There's many schools of thought, and you learn all of these, and they're marvelous, and they all lead you to this one. So every one of those views, when Buddha diverged from the Hindus, they all state there's different levels of understanding this emptiness. So they get ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. But at the first level, even of the Buddhist views, they still do assert there has to be something there that is a valid object of the word self. And they get all the way even to the highest levels of the Madhyamika, the Svatantrika Madhyamikas, they still say there's something there. It's only finally the Prasangika Madhyamikas who say no, as Ramazopa puts it, from the side of the object, there is nothing there that gives its meaning. There's nothing there. So this is where we have to learn to understand. This is what we have to learn to understand. We have to go through these different levels of dependent arising, which is the king of logics, to prove this point. So right now we have the two extreme views. We run between these like drunken sailors, you know, either there's something existing or there's nothing existing, and we can't get it right. So the middle way, the actual middle way understanding, when you've got these two truths together, because in reality, they're two separate ways of presenting. Another way of saying it is they're like two sides of the coin. So when we finally understand emptiness and finally understand dependent arising, when we begin to even understand intellectually, these two don't contradict each other, which is how we hear them now. They don't conflict. Now we hear it like that. But when we're on the right track, they help us understand that they're both leading to the same thing. So the more we understand dependent arising, the more it helps us understand emptiness. The more we... Okay, so now let's use some logical reasons to prove, using reasons of dependent arising to prove emptiness. So dependent arising is in the details. Details. It sounds a funny thing to say, but it's really true, you know. So let's look at the first level. We'll just touch upon the first level arising. That's the that one. We'll go to the second one, which is a really, really key one, and it leads us finally to the subtlest one. So the second one, and this is where the details come in. Buddha's saying, first of all, things are, okay, there are many phenomena in the universe, okay? There are trillions of phenomena. The first thing we have to do if we want to discuss how something exists, we all have to be on the same page. We have to define our terms. So we need to, you know, for example, like we want to discuss what a thermos is, we all have to agree, by convention, agree what a thermos is, otherwise we'll never discuss. So it's a flat bottom metal container that holds my tea. We get to know, once we know that definition, we all agree, we shake hands, we tick the box, and we all now know what a thermos is. Now we can begin to discuss it. So now we're going to look at the object, the phenomenon, and there are many phenomena in the universe. The phenomenon called a person. So the word person, I, me, myself, self, these are all synonymous. They are referring to the same thing. So conventionally, there is a thermos that does exist, that does function to keep my tea hot. We can prove that first conventionally. Then we have to look into how it exists ultimately. So we can all here agree there is a person called, you give your name, you know, called Robina. There's a person sitting here talking right now, and that she's a person. She's not a thermos. She's not a toilet. We might treat ourselves like toilets sometimes, but we fit the definition of a person. And in general, we're a sentient, or even a sentient being. They're not quite synonymous, because a Buddha is a person, but a Buddha is not a sentient being. Apparently, sentient beings are everybody but a Buddha. But in general, a mind possessor, we're one of those. We're a mind possessor, sentient being, the Tibetan translation. A mind possessor, Semchen. But we are a person, okay? So I'm a person. So now let's look into how this person, this I, this self, exists. Okay, so the second level of dependent arising is that everything exists in dependent its bits and pieces. A person, a cup, a computer, a moment of mind, a lamp, whatever exists, whatever is a phenomenon. And in Buddhism, there are various synonyms for that which exists. You learn this very first when you study Buddhist philosophy. A phenomenon, an object of knowledge, an object, existent, space. That's at least 5 synonyms. So whatever exists is one of those. It's a phenomenon, object of knowledge, and existent, etc. So a person, we establish there's a person called Robina. Okay, so now that person is made of parts. So I like to use the analogy, like, you know, when you go IKEA and you buy it, you see the picture of the table, but then what you get is a bunch of pieces, isn't it? 17 screws and 4 bits of wood and 1 leg or whatever it is, and then all the pieces. It's a really nice example. Well, let's think, imagine you go, you know, you're going to construct a person. You're going to get to IKEA and you bring home the box, and what will you have in that box is the hundreds and thousands, in fact, of the components that you put together to make a person. Think like that. So what are the components of a person? It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole bunch of pieces of the mind. There's anger and jealousy and love and kindness and generosity and intention and discrimination. There are thousands of these conceptual stories, each of which is a piece of your mind. They're the parts of your mind. Your eye consciousness, your ear consciousness, they're parts of your mind. There are bits and pieces. The mind is a phenomenon and it is made up of parts. The body is a phenomenon and it is made up of its parts. And the two together make up the object called a person. So you get your box from IKEA and it delivered there, and you're going to make a person. You're going to make Robina. So what you'll have in that box, you know, will be all the components, and you have to put them together according to the instruction. We get this. We have to. That's how we make our furniture these days, isn't it? And you know, this is the interesting point. You've got to have the right amount of things. You won't just have 3 screws. You know, if you need 4 screws, they won't give you 5 or 3. You get exactly the right number of screws. Well, in terms of a person, they won't just chuck in 3 legs. A normal person has 2 legs. You have 1 nose, and there'll be 2 ears, and the eyes, and there'll be all the different states like this. They are the components of you who make of what you are made of. They are the parts of a person. So Buddha says what we believe is that in that box from IKEA, we're going to search for all those bits, and then there's going to be a very special bit that's specially wrapped with gold or diamonds or light shining, and that special bit is called I. And when that bit gets in, then the person becomes a person. We really believe there's this special part called I. We believe it, we speak it, we say it, we totally grasp at that every millisecond. But the Buddha says that box of IKEA will not give you that peace. You not only, you know, there isn't that kind of peace. You don't need an independent I. And that's the point here. The I that we think exists at the most gross level is it's separate from the other parts. Look at our language. I have a nose. My table or my thermos has a base. So that's 2 nouns, isn't it? So one of the arguments we have to use to prove logically that this is a mistake is there's one particular debate we use. It's called, if something exists, it's either 1 or it's more than 1. So let's do that analysis here to prove that not only there won't be a piece in that box, IKEA didn't make a mistake in not putting in a little special little I, and the Christians call that a soul, the Greeks call it an essence, the Hindus call it an Atman, a separate, independent piece that makes you the person you become. The Buddha says you won't find such a peace, and anyway, you don't need such a peace. So of course, this is shocking to us because we don't question. When we say, I have a hand, we don't question that we think you're going to find 2 pieces. So the one, we had this discussion this morning in San Francisco, so I'm going to discuss it again. Rosanna was there this morning. Hello, Rosanna. Can you hear me? Rosanna, are you there? She was this morning. She's there now. Anyway, I'm repeating what you heard this morning.
Yes,
so
I'm
here. This is a really good analysis to do. And this, oh good, I'm happy you said there. I'm very glad. I got a shock. Okay, I'm very glad, Rosanna. So let's look at this one. This sounds so silly when we do this analysis initially. Let's look at it, okay? That I have a thermos. I'll keep it really simple. I have a analyze that statement. If you listen to those words, look at the person saying it, you're going to hear the words that I said, and you're going to count two phenomena, aren't you? I said two nouns, didn't I? Phenomena are like nouns, except one's a pronoun. So you're going to say, well, that's Robina's right. There's Robina and there's a thermos. That's two phenomena, isn't it? Now, this is an easy and simple example of two phenomena that have no direct relationship with each other. There's no interdependence between us. In other words, the existence of Robina does not depend upon the existence of of a thermos. And the existence of a thermos does not depend upon the existence of Robina to function in their jobs. My thermos can hold its tea and keep it hot without me existing. And Robina can function quite well without the thermos. So it's a simple example of two phenomena that are both separate and independent, complicated. If the thermos breaks, Robina's not affected. If the Robina dies, the thermos still exists. So there's no direct dependent relationship. It's pretty evident, isn't it? I'll make another statement. I have a nose and an ear. To analyze how many phenomena did I mention? Eye, nose, ear. That's three nouns, three phenomena. So in the same way, if my previous statement was correct, you'd have to point out two phenomena, and we did, no problem, that are independent of each other. Now, this is more subtle and more nuanced, obviously. So we, without thinking, will say, I have a nose and an ear, and we give equal status to those three. And we assume, without analysis, we never analyze this. We just take it as a given, that there is an ear and a nose, easy enough to prove, but we assume there is an eye that is separate and independent, that owns the ear and that owns the nose. We vaguely feel that. When, you know, if Steve says to Marie Robina, you've got such an ugly nose, I'll say, how dare you insult me? And he will say, no, Robina, I didn't insult you. I insulted your nose. Let's be precise about this. But because we believe the nose is mine, or another mistake we make, which we'll discuss in a minute, we believe that the nose is me. We have these two mistakes. One mistake is we think there's an eye that's separate from the nose. And the other mistake is we think the eye is the nose. So we're going to look at that one later. This is the first discussion. So what does this mean? Well, in the same way that the thermos is unaffected if Robina drops dead, and Robina is unaffected if her thermos breaks. Okay, she mightn't be if she's attached to it, but that's not the point here. In terms of their function, they don't depend upon each other. So we can point out, we've got to point out three phenomena here, remember? We point out the ear, no problem. Look at it, the ear, and we see its job. Its job is to listen, to hear things. That's its function. We can point out the nose. Its function is to breathe. Ear does not depend upon a nose to do its job, and nose does not depend upon an ear to do its job. So you could say they're both independent and separate. They are. In terms of their function, they do not need each other. Simply speaking. So where's the third phenomenon that doesn't depend upon, that doesn't exist interdependently with the nose and the ear? That's what we think is there. But the Buddha says you won't find that one. So what's a proof of this? If there were an eye that is independent, separate and independent of the nose and the ear, when my nose is cut, we know that my ear doesn't feel anything. My ear's sitting there feeling sorry for the poor nose. Thank God it wasn't me, the ear is saying. It's not feeling any pain. We know the pain is in the nose. We know the ear is not affected. If my nose gets cut off, my ear can still hear. That's easy. Now, what about the eye that we believe is there? That's the owner of the nose and the owner of the ear. Now, this is the point. If there were such an I, a separate, independent I, then the I would also not be affected when the nose is hurt. The I will be watching and going, phew, what a relief it wasn't me that got affected. The poor old nose, and will feel sorry for the nose. But we know it's not like this, which is already proving that if there is an I that has an intimate relationship with the nose and the ear, but this is the point, you won't be able to find or point out one. So in this case, the intimate relationship, but they are not the same phenomena. And they're not, and you won't find, you're not the same phenomena. Why not? This is the other argument. We'll think, well, it's just the nose is me, isn't it? Well, no, don't be silly. The label can't be the base, as Lama Zopa says. So what is the definition of a nose? It's the part of a body that breathes air. What's the definition of I? It's, listen, so, okay, one is, the Buddha's saying there is an I, but it is existing interdependently and inextricably with its parts. Listen to this one. It's very simple. My thermos has a base. That's two nouns, isn't it? Base is one phenomenon. Thermos is another phenomenon. So we think that the same as an eye having a nose, you can split them off. But you take the base away from the thermos. I pull it away, and what I end up with is not a base any longer. What is it? It's a piece of metal. And in one hand, I have a piece of round metal. In another hand, I have a metal tube. So what happened to the thermos? You can't separate the base from the thermos. The base is not the thermos, and you can't separate them. So there is a thermos, but you can't point it out. It is not the base, it's not the sides, it's not the top, and nor is it all of them, and nor is it separate from them. So the two arguments we have to prove are, one, if there is an independent I, if there is an I that's intrinsic, if there is an inherent I, which ego grasping believes, then either it exists separately from the parts, and if it did exist separately, like we just suggested, if there is a little I in there, the special little piece in the IKEA box, once you put all the pieces together and you put the I in, and then I becomes an I, which is how we think, what makes you an I is the I, then, you know, but there isn't one, and you don't need one. The parts do fine on their own. So if there is an I that's separate, then it would not be affected when the nose gets hurt. That's fact. Like the thermos is not affected in its function when Robina drops dead. And the Robina is not affected when the thermos breaks, because they're separate and independent. So here, the ear and the nose are also separate and independent, but in their relationship to the eye, you can't separate them, but you won't be able to point out a piece called an eye. There is an eye, but you can't point it out. And finally, I is merely the name we give to the parts. That's the final meaning of emptiness, merely labeled. These are the words, okay? But we have to squeeze our brains, like Lama Yeshe put it. So in the sutra, in the teachings in the Lam Rim, when we, you know, like you read, there's this wonderful, the discussion we have to go through, we have to meditate on. There's the 4-point analysis. The first is, Buddha's telling us in advance, Robina, you will not find an intrinsic I in there anywhere. He will tell us that. But he says, don't just believe me, you've got to prove it to yourself. So one classic type of argument is the 4-point analysis. Now, the first one is, we have to, and this is the hardest part, and once we've got this one down, we can realize emptiness easily. That the first one is, we have to establish in our mind as clearly as we can what we think the independent I is. And this is the hardest part. This is the hardest part. Once we've begun to, we've then established what we think it is, they call it the object to be negated. The next piece is we then have only two options. If there were that independent I, it's either going to exist separately from the parts, or it is going to exist oneness with the parts. You do the logical analysis and you establish definitively that they are the only options. And then you have to do the proving of that. So you have to analyze to check if there is an I separate from the parts, if there is an I oneness with the parts. And when you do this, you then come to the realization that there is not that. And that's the realization of emptiness. So it's really logical thinking. And of course, we're not used to thinking that to realize emptiness demands logic, but this is the point. So there are many arguments, and we're using some here, but the argument this is implying is the real argument, the best argument is dependent arising. That there's no I that exists independently of the causes. There is no I that exists independently of the parts. And finally, there is no I that exists independently of the mind calling it that. That's the subtlest one. Everything leads to that one. So the point about dependent arising as well is in the details. We learn to look into the details because that's what your thinking is involved in. You don't think, in a sense, you don't think about emptiness. You think about dependent arising, and which then triggers the realization, aha, therefore there is no I from its own side. So emptiness, if you like, is the conclusion you come to from thinking about dependent arising. That's the way of saying it, I mean, we didn't run out of time. It's ridiculous. An hour and a half is nothing. Look at it, already nearly time to go home. So I think you have to ask me some questions now, and then we'll go into it a bit more detail from your questions. Come on. Questions? Any questions? No questions. Well, keep on going. Okay. Another one we did this morning, Mary.
Venerable, I have a question. Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm not sure if you can see me.
Hi, sweetheart.
Hey, my question is, all right, so from what I've understood from your teaching, so you can realize emptiness by studying the theories and then meditating on like the points you've just listed. Mm-hmm. I've also read that unless you are on a retreat, it's really hard to actually realize emptiness. In this current situation with COVID, where we're all trapped at home, we can't go into retreat with other people like yourself.
Sure.
Can you still realize emptiness?
Well, sweetheart, Lisa, in order to really realize emptiness, not only do we need to be in a retreat situation, but we need the first thing we need to accomplish is what's called single-pointed concentration, or they're known in Sanskrit as shamatha. This is amazing technique invented by these Indians well before the Buddha took with him. That's the most necessary thing to do. And what single point of concentration is that you gain, that takes several years to get, and that definitely needs to be done in retreat mode. It's very unusual for a person to be able to realize, to get single point of concentration in their daily life. You need in very particular conditions in the mountains, metaphorically or actually, where you, for several years, uninterruptedly, you work on your mind and you begin to get this powerful level of concentration that enables you to go beyond your grosser level of conceptuality and sensory consciousness, which is the level we function at and the level we only posit as existing in modern psychology. We begin to access this subtler level of our cognition that is like a super laser-like focused level of mind, like the microscope of our mind. It's only at that level, finally, that we can see the truth that there never has been, isn't, and never could be this kind of I. But we can all start where we are. The talking we're doing here, Lisa, we need to do this in our daily life every day, talking about dependent arising as one of the logical arguments, thinking about it at a conceptual level. But finally, yes, we need a very particular retreat environment in which we can get single point of concentration, which is accessing the microscope of your mind, because only at that level can you have a direct realization beyond conceptuality of the truth of this, where you actually cut the root of the ignorance. So the short answer is yes, you can't do it without these very particular conditions. Exactly. But we can do plenty of work. We can think about all the things we're thinking about right now. We can do masses of work every day. We can apply the idea of dependent arising and therefore understanding emptiness every day in our daily lives. Do you understand, Lisa?
Yes, thank you.
Good, darling. Thank you so much. So, okay.
Hello, Venerable
Yes.
Robina.
Yes.
Here is Wolfgang. How are you?
Wolfgang. Yes.
I have a question. When you die,
Yes.
breaks and the body breaks up, the parts become separate.
Yes.
What is doing without a body? When you just have consciousness by yourself, separated from all the other parts. What is consciousness of the body?
You're breaking up. I'm so sorry, Wolfgang. So ask that last part of it. Where's the last phrase? What did you say?
What does consciousness do without a body when it's by itself?
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, so first of all, just taking the Vajrayana model, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's very helpful. The Vajrayana model of the universe and of persons is that all minds that exist, there are trillions of minds existing in the universe. They're all beginningless and endless, and they're all not physical, but all minds are inextricably linked to their own set of the four elements. The universe consists of matter, and in the Buddhist model, that's still the four elements. We used to talk about that in the Middle Ages in our culture, but all matter is made of the four elements. And then there are minds, and all minds are inextricably linked with their own set of the four elements. So in that model, we've got gross consciousness and we have gross body. That's what we're talking about right now, this bag of bones that we've got that is completely linked to our grosser level of consciousness, which is mainly our sensory consciousness. Then we've got subtle consciousness, which is mainly our mental states. And we've got a subtle level of physicality. We don't posit that, of course, in our culture. That's from the yoga system, from even the Chinese system, and certainly from the Tibetan, from the Buddhist system, the Vajrayana, subtle consciousness. So we've got the subtle physical energy, the 72,000 subtle channels coursing through our body. And coursing through those channels, the subtle nervous system, are all these different wind energies or prana. This is the basis of the Tibetan medical system, and equally the Chinese one, and the Ayurvedic to some extent, I think. So these subtle wind energies, which are the source of all the health. There's many of these. And throughout all those channels, linked inextricably to those different wind energies, are all our different states of mind, our mental states, which are more subtle. And then eventually in the death process, as you go through this deconstruction process, the senses cease, the grosser body finishes, the subtle mind is there, the breathing has stopped, but the subtle mind is still existing, and there's a continuing deconstruction of the subtle levels of mind, getting all the way to a very subtle level of consciousness. They call that the clear light consciousness. That's the subtlest level of our conscious being, as well as the subtle level of the physical energies. They all cease to function, and all of this subsumes to the very subtle physical level, which is called the wind energy, and the very subtle mind. And these are inextricably linked. So technically, that is mind and body, but not the gross body that we think of. So there's never a moment when consciousness is on its own. It's always linked to some level of physicality, the gross level, the subtle level, and the very subtle level. But effectively, when you're beyond this gross body, your consciousness is existing. And once you stop breathing, your subtle consciousness is there. And once you get to the very subtle level, that level, which is containing all the karmic imprints of everything Wolfgang has ever done since beginningless time that haven't yet ripened, that will be programmed based upon the karma that ripened at the time you died, and you'll go through this intermediate state, which is like a dream state, and then you'll find your way to your new body and your new mummy in the new womb, and off you go again, getting a gross body. So the mind is always existing, and the subtle physical energies are always there inextricably, and it's driven by the karmic imprints that we have put into the mind. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's look at another example to try and show how we don't need an extra piece called an eye. It sounds a funny way to put it. And this is an example I always use. And today I use the example of the statement, I'm walking down the street. It's a simple statement. So right now we can do that easily because we're completely programmed with habit from past karma. But let's just say I have a stroke and I can't do it again, and I even forget the meaning. So this is when this is like the IKEA example again. You know, you'd have an awful lot of work to do to help me train, won't you, to do this action again of walking up the street. And you'd have to, and I have to learn. So first of all, you'd have to start letting me know all the different parts of my body involved in walking up the street. My foot, and my foot is made of toes and muscles and bones and ligaments, and then my ankle, and then my knee and my calf and my thigh and my bottom and my this and my that. There's going to be many, many, many parts of my body that I have to retrain, isn't it? I mean, I've got to do it consciously. It'll be enormous effort to do that. And I've got to learn to know all those bits and pieces. So if you like I'm not saying you're going to do, you're going to make a list for me of all the components of the pieces in the IKEA box called Robina. Now I'm going to have to learn all those components again and how to use them. So that's you're going to have a long list, aren't you, of all the different pieces of my body involved in the action of walking up the street. And if you continue that list, you probably have thousands of parts, all the bits and the pieces of the body, all dependent upon each other to simply accomplish the job of walking up the street. This is really logical. We understand this. I have then the other part that's really vital and fairly obvious, the main parts involved in me doing that job, is my mind. I mean, if it's a dead body, don't even bother trying. You know, you've got to have a mind. So then what is the parts of the mind involved in walking up the street? Well, I've got to have ear consciousness so I can hear your instructions. I've got to have eye consciousness so I can read the words. I've got to have tactile consciousness so I can begin to feel the body, you know, the foot touching the ground. I've got to have intention to do it. I've got to have good memory not to forget the instructions. I've got to have discrimination that can distinguish between this and that. There's going to be many, many, many parts of my mind involved in simply doing the action, working hand in hand with my body to walk up the street. This is called dependent arising. All the thousands of components involved in walking up the street. You'd have a vast list, wouldn't you? They're the components, and you'd have all those components in your IKEA box. And I'd learn to put them all together and train myself to do that action. Now, the question is, and again, each part, like the pieces in IKEA, that screw goes there, that piece goes there. You won't just get a bunch of screws or 5 legs or 3 eyes and try and do your best. You'll get exactly the right number of eyes, the right number of ears, the right number of nose, the right number of muscles, and each of those components will do its job perfectly. So when your body, you know that with health, when your body is all working perfectly, all the bits do their job properly. The liver does its job properly. The kidneys do their job properly. The heart does its job properly. The eyes are working properly. All the pieces of the body, and this is the details, do their job nicely, and they all work beautifully together interdependently to enable me to function. That's when the body's working well. And when your mind is working well, then we know that means full of virtue and intelligence. That's all the pieces doing their job. Now, the point is that even just the action of walking up the street, after we've allocated to each of those parts their particular job, the eye does the looking, the ear does the listening, the foot does the walking, the knee does this, the ligaments do that, the muscles do this. Each piece has their job. But what job is now the point? What job is left over that for the precious eye that is feeling left out? Hey, I don't have a job. What job am I supposed to do in Robina walking up the street? Well, guess what? There is no job. You don't need a boss. You don't need a little eye to run the show. That's what we think the job of the eye is. I will make sure the eyes do the right job. I will make sure the heel does the right job. I will make sure the intention does the right job. No, you don't need an eye. The parts do beautifully working together. That's the point. If you want a boss, the boss is called intention. That's the mental factor that's there every second, and that's the meaning of the word karma, mental action. If everything starts, as Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, I will. The thought, I will walk up the street. I will put my left foot on there. I will turn my head. That is the boss. But our trouble is we're programmed with most of our past actions, many of them most negative. We're programmed completely. We come into this life and we don't even know there's intention, but we've programmed it from eons. If you want a boss, intention is the boss, and it's part of the mind. There's no peace separate from the body, and there's no peace separate from the mind. And there's no peace called I. Not only will you not find one, you don't need one. We've made it up. But there is an I. As Lama Zopa says, when you've realized the two truths, when you've realized there is no I, independent I, there's no independent I. There's no I independent of the parts. There's no I independent of the mind. There's no I independent of the body. When you've realized there's not one atom of that I here, it's as if there's no I. Ultimately, but conventionally, there is an I, he says. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So the two truths go so perfectly together, you know. And of course, we can't hear these two. We hear them as separate. We kind of think, well, Buddha, make up your mind, mate. Is there an I or isn't there? We think it's either one or the other, you know. It's way more nuanced than that. There is an I, but not from its own side. There is no I that you can find, which doesn't mean there's no I. There is an I, which doesn't mean there's an I. So it's super nuanced. And that's why having the two truths together as the method, you'll never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. And this is what's shown beautifully to us in the Heart Sutra. It's really powerful, you know. In the Heart Sutra, basically what the Heart Sutra is a discussion. It's a presentation of all the components of the universe, the different categories of phenomena that exist in the universe. And it's a discussion about dependent arising, you know. So the first lot is the 5 aggregates. The next lot is well, I forget the order. I forget. There's the 4 noble truths, the 12 links of dependent arising, the 18 constituents, the 6 sense phenomena, the 6 sense consciousnesses, the objects of the 6 sense consciousness, etc., etc. All these different phenomena, and every one of them is a dependent arising. Every one of them is empty of inherently existing. And we have to do the analysis of each one of these. So when Buddha, so what it is, Buddha is sitting there in meditation, actually. One of the ways he gave a lot of his sutras, he was sitting in meditation, just blissing out. He's sitting there, but he's channeling his thoughts into his disciples' minds. So Shariputra and Avalokitesvara, as a 10th level bodhisattva, are having a conversation. And they're telling what Buddha's saying. Buddha's thinking it himself. So as Avalokitesvara says, when he starts the discussion, he says, form, which is the first of the 5 aggregates, okay? The 5 aggregates is just a way of dividing up the components of a person. So Buddha takes, the first one is called form, which is all our physical matter. So he says, form is emptiness. Form is empty, he says. Then he says, emptiness is form. Then he says, form is nothing other than emptiness. And emptiness is nothing other than form. So let's look at that, because that's the way of presenting to ensure we don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake. But to do that, first, we've got to get a sense of this word emptiness for a minute. You know, it gets us very confused. So remember, everything that exists is a phenomenon, is an object of knowledge, is an existent. We first establish it, we label it, we define it. So what is the type of phenomenon called an emptiness? What is it? It seems pretty abstract to us, doesn't it? So let's just put it this way to keep simply. If I go to drink my water and I suddenly discover, oh, my cup is empty, I'll say. My thermos is empty. What we mean there is my thermos lacks tea. And the particular point about this is very interesting. When you're going to find an emptiness of something, an emptiness of something is a way of making a noun out of the fact that when I say my cup is empty, turn that into a noun. Then we're going to say, you know, if there's tea in my cup, we will say there is tea in my cup. But if I say my cup is empty of tea, turn that into a positive statement, and you will say existing in my cup is the absence of tea. So the absence of tea, another word, is emptiness. Emptiness just means absence of something. If there's no dollars in your bank, you'll say, oh my God, there's no dollars in my bank. But another way of putting it, turn it into a phenomenon, and you will say what it does exist in my bank is the emptiness of dollars. It's not playing with words. It's very powerful. There's what your mind cognizes. The mind cognizes phenomena. So a phenomenon is something that exists. So the emptiness of dollars is a real phenomenon that your mind cognizes when it looks in your bank account. The emptiness of tea is a real phenomenon that I will cognize when I look in my cup. But the interesting point here is this, and this especially when it comes to emptiness of the inherent I, and you'll see my point. The only person who will cognize the absence of tea in their cup is the person who expects tea. You go to the shop where you've got to buy your mug. You go to Kmart and you go to the mug section to buy 6 mugs. You don't look in the mug and say, oh, there's no tea in the mug. You don't expect tea in the mug in the shop, do you? So the only person who will notice the absence of tea, and this is a really major point, is the person who expects tea. If I'm, Steve has been my husband for 47 years and he leaves me for a younger version, guarantee you every day when I'm at home, all I will notice will be the absence of Steve, won't I? You might never have heard of Steve, and you come visit me, you will never notice in a trillion years the phenomenon called the absence of Steve, because it's only me who expects Steve to be there, who wants Steve to be there. So I'll always be noticing the absence of Steve. We get this. So the only person who sees the absence of something is a person who expects it to be there. This is a really powerful point. So the absence of something is a real phenomenon that does exist. And this is the major point here. It doesn't mean nothingness. Nothingness is not the meaning of emptiness. And this is the biggest mistake we make. Oh, well, there's no I might as well kill myself. No, it doesn't mean that. So, so one more little piece to understand, and we'll go back to the Heart Sutra. Yeah, example, another, like I mentioned before, another example. Let's say Steve is colorblind, and he's all the time he's seen black in this life. He sees it as pink. His eyes are mistaken. He sees it as pink. Whenever black appears to him, he sees it as pink. He believes in pink. He's never questioned it. And now we fix his eyes, and then I present a black thermos to him again. What he will first cognize, because of his expectation of pink, because his belief in pink, he will get the shock of his life. Because his eyes are fixed, he's and this is the point, he's expecting pink. So of course he will get a shock because he now can see the truth. But the first phenomenon he will cognize, the first thing he will see, the first thing that appears to his mind is the realization of the absence of pink. It's the same with when we realize emptiness of the independent I. We have believed for eons in the presence of something that doesn't exist there. The pink has never existed there. We have believed for eons in the presence of an independent I. Okay, we've got to work out what that means. But that's a fantasy, and we believed in it for eons. So finally, when you're in your subtle meditation, and you've done all your thinking over many lifetimes, you've done your dependent arising, you've done your meditations, you've done your purifications, and you've done analysis, and one day at some point there will be the first moment when the penny will drop and you will see, nakedly for the first time, the absence of the I you have thought that was there, and you realize for the first time, like that pink, a simple example, that there never has been, isn't, but in this case never could be, that there could be pink, there could be Steve in my house, but this is a radical absence. It's the absence of an I that has never, doesn't, and could never exist. That's your first moment of the realization of the powerful phenomenon called the absence of the fantasy I. It's a real phenomenon. So this is the one. Let's just say another example. Let's say Steve believes there's $5,000 in his bank. Let's just say he knows he saved it up. He believes $5. He expects it. He knows it's there with absolute confidence. But he looks in his bank account, and what is in reality is zero, let's say. Now, think about this. If he says, Robina, look in my bank account, tell me how much is there. I have no expectation of $5,000, do I? I will tell him the truth. Nothing. There's no dollars, Steve. I won't have a shock. I will tell him the truth. There's nothing there. But what will Steve see? So I will see the fact there's no dollars. That's, if you like, nihilism. There's no dollars. What will Steve cognize when he looks in the bank? He will see the zero. He will see the zero, but he will get the shock of his life. And he'll go, oh my God, where's my $5,000? So what he just cognized is a very powerful phenomenon for his mind, because he expects $5,000. What he will cognize is not zero, but is the absence of his precious $5,000. So what I'm getting at here is this. The phenomenon that appears to Steve when he looks in the bank based upon his expectations is a particular phenomenon called the emptiness of $5,000. What I will cognize will be the $0. So $0 is not the same as the absence of $5,000, is it? They're completely separate phenomena, aren't they? So the absence of inherent I is exactly the same as the absence of the $5,000. You expect there to be an I there. And when you cognize that there isn't one, you don't cognize, oh, well, there's no I chucked out all the bits and there's nothing left and there's no I. That's like chucking out your $5,000 and ending up with nothing. That's nihilism, but that is not happens. You will cognize not that there is no I, and there isn't one, and you won't find it. But the thing that you cognize is the absence of that precious, independent I that you have believed in since beginningless time. So the absence of an inherent I is not the same as no I. They're different phenomena. So it's never nihilism. It can't be. So now back to the form, the first of the phenomena, is empty. To spell it out. Form is empty of existing from its own side. Then he says, emptiness of form, conventional form is empty of being an inherent form. And then he says, emptiness of inherent form is conventional form. So in other words, you can't have form, conventional form, without at the same time the emptiness of inherent form. So black thermos is emptiness of pink thermos. Emptiness of thermos is black thermos. Wherever there is a black thermos, there is the emptiness of a pink thermos. And wherever there's emptiness of a pink thermos, there is the presence of a black thermos. Wherever there is a bank account, there is the absence of $5,000. And wherever there's emptiness of $5,000, that exists where? Right in the bank account. So form, conventional form, is empty of existing as inherent form. So wherever you find the phenomenon called emptiness of inherent form, it will exist. That emptiness, that phenomenon called the emptiness of inherent form, exists right there on the conventional form. So form is empty. And wherever you find the emptiness of inherent form, you will find form. And wherever you find form, you will find the emptiness of inherent form. You can't have them separate. So it can't be nihilism, because dependent arising is emptiness, and emptiness is dependent arising. Dependent arising is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than dependent arising. Is a way of saying it. You can't have one without the other. So it's never nihilism. You can't have black here without a thermos, can you? Thermos is black. Black is thermos. Thermos is nothing other than black, and black is nothing other than thermos. So it's obvious that black is a characteristic of this thermos. And wherever you find this thermos, you will find the characteristic of, and in this case, wherever you find the characteristic of black, you're going to find this thermos. They're not separate. So emptiness of inherent Robina is a characteristic of conventional Robina. Wherever there is conventional Robina, right there, there exists the absence of inherent Robina. So emptiness of inherent Robina is not no Robina. It's not nihilism. So form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. They come together. This is the grounding in the two truths. You can never become nihilistic when you start to understand that. It's time to go home already. Look at that. We just started. So any questions before we finish?
Hello, Robina.
Any questions?
Hello, Robina. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, go for it.
Hi,
Hold on.
okay. I have a question about.
Sweetheart.
All right, thank you. So in the example of Steve with the $5,000, if Steve understands ultimate reality, if he understands truth, like if he starts to feel attachment to the money, can he?
Okay. Before you go on, this is nothing to, this is another discussion altogether, and it's not the point here. I can answer it, but it's not the issue I was discussing.
It's
yeah,
but it's not.
It's not the point. It's not
It
the
is
point.
not. I wasn't.
It's a very simple example. Okay, so go on, ask your question. It's okay, I can answer it. Go on.
So
Go on.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is like when, if Steve were to, like if Steve is understanding ultimate reality in that moment, will he not be attached to the money? Or if he if feelings start to arise as like, as a
No,
victim?
of course not, darling. No, I mean, nothing. No, of course not, darling. There's been no delusions whatsoever. It's not possible. If you realize emptiness, there's no delusions. Of course not. Of course not. Absolutely.
So what is the point that where a person is at that is maybe, like I'm thinking of an example with myself where something came up that I could realize was not my delusion, but I could feel my own like protection, self-protection, ego grasping. And so, but bouncing around in my mind conceptually, I understand that there are delusions, my own delusions, another person's delusions, and I'm able in my mind to see that, but my body still begins to shake with anger, even though I won't direct anger at the person.
It's just, of course, Dawn. So the point is, Dawn, we all know you can have the theory of how to make a cake, but it takes time to put it into practice, doesn't it? You can have the theory of how to drive a car. You can even pass an oral exam. But everything there's a time lapse between knowing intellectually and practicing the experience of it. That goes without saying. Everything we learn is like that. The second you learn to know a recipe of a cake perfectly and win and pass your exam on the recipe, it might take you ages to experience the truth of that cake because things take time. Absolutely the same here. You know very well what anger is and what attachment is. We know the theories perfectly, but it takes a long time, Dawn, to get the experience of it. And that's what practice is. We've got to accept there's a big time lapse between intellectual and experiential knowledge. And it's not a mistake. It's just how it is. Nothing wrong with that. It's got to start somewhere, isn't it?
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
Good, darling. Thank you.
Thank you.
What else, anybody? Some more questions? Thank you, Dawn. Thanks, sweetheart. Any questions about pain and arising and emptiness?
Justin, go ahead.
Mary.
Yeah. Yes, Venerable, can you hear me okay?
Time it myself. Yes, Justin, go on.
Hi, yes, just the word human. As we're deconstructing the ego, I'm going into our species. Watching a video today over anthropology. Homo sapiens existing 300,000 years ago. We say bipedal, primate, human.
Okay.
And then
What's the question? What's the question, Justin?
Human realm, human mind that is without beginning. It's like beginningless and endless. But humans began on Earth 300,000 years ago. So how can we have?
Buddha probably would disagree with that. You see, the only way we can look at it with the physical world, we only take this planet as our given. Because we look, everything is only physical. So naturally, we try to track back physically. But I mean, by definition, a human is a person with virtue and intelligence. I don't think the humans, the so-called humans that existed 300,000 years ago, were so virtuous, intelligent. They used to eat each other and eat animals. They were as thick as posts. So I would suggest that's not really what a human is. I mean, that's not the Buddhist definition of a human at all.
So this kind of corporeal, this shell is not necessarily the human shell somewhere else in the universe?
What?
Does that make sense? Okay. Since it's a human mind, it doesn't depend on being in a primate type body on Earth.
That's the Western view of calling it a primate type body. The Buddhist view is a very different one. Okay, so I'll try and explain. This is not how we think in our world. It's very evident. So a mind is not physical. So this mind at the moment is a type of, the human birth at the moment is one that is based on this planet, looking like a bunch of apes, basically, isn't it? I mean, they say we have the same DNA or whatever. So, but the human mind, the main characteristics of a human mind are virtue and intelligence. The delusions are common to all sentient beings, hell beings, spirits, gods, maybe not gods because they're in a blissful state, but all the deluded sentient beings like animals and spirits and hell beings, which are real beings for the Buddha, they predominantly only have delusions. So they're common to all beings altogether. That's their deluded states of mind. What characterizes a human, what is our saving grace, is access to virtue and intelligence. So a human mind before this planet we had a much subtler level of mind. If we were a human before this planet, there would have been a subtler state of mind with a subtler level of physicality, still the four elements, would have been more like a godlike experience. There's subtle light body, the mind is super intelligent, there's only virtue, delusions were not prevailing at all, they were kind of quiet, but delusions were there. But then gradually the delusions began to grow, attachment and all the attachment especially, and that began to pollute the wind energies, which gradually caused just to have five senses, and gradually we evolved karmically, or devolved, if you like, into being humans, born on a planet looking like a bunch of apes. So penises and vaginas and eyes and ears, all the sensory consciousnesses are coming from attachment. So we karmically created this body looking like an ape, but luckily we have access to some virtue. So it's a very different analysis of what a human is and where we come from. We don't come from apes at all. That's an absurdity for the Buddha. The physical body, we can see some relationship, but a human, I'm not sure if we take this analysis, I don't think humans were not that far along, not time long ago. When was there in history a bunch of humans who only mainly had virtue? I'm not so sure. I remember reading about, some anthropologists in India, they talked about the Hindu civilization, and they 3,000 years ago found there was no evidence of any weapons. Well, that indicates really a human. That's a human, only having virtue, no wish to harm, no wish to lie, no wish to steal. That's a human. So I'm not sure, using this analysis, how far back humans go. And if we did go back further, we'd go back to a state nothing to do with this planet. It's a weird analysis. It's not how we think at all in our culture, but this is using the logic of the Buddha's view.
Thank you.
The human minds, which are virtue, they've existed since beginningless time. Virtue is beginningless. Delusions are also beginningless. So it's the configuration of the delusions and virtues as to which state, which realm we are born into. Animals have 99% delusions, very little access to virtue because of their habits, not to mention spirits and God and hell beings, They're all predominantly delusions. That's why they're suffering.
That sounds very similar to the Christian Genesis version.
It is, baby.
Yeah.
The sound of this is terrible. It's the worst time it's ever been. I don't know why. Very fascinating. Anyway, any more questions? It's late, I know. Any more questions? The sound is terrible. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me, you people?
Yes, Venerable Robina, John Ballantyne has a question. His mic is not working. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes, I can hear you.
This is from John. Can you ask Venerable Robina if she believes she has realized emptiness? Sorry. And if not, why?
Well, it's not a question that you would answer. So I won't, I mean, I'm not, you know, if I say I do realize emptiness, I say I don't realize emptiness, it's really not the issue. It's not the point, because it's very personal whether a person has, and anybody who has realized it would absolutely tell you they haven't. With absolute certainty, they would tell you you haven't. So it's not going to gain anything. All we can do is listen to the teachings and take the teachings ourselves. And then eventually when we realize emptiness, then you'll, John, then you'll get clairvoyance, and then you'll be able to prove certainly whether I have or not, because you'll see my mind. That's my answer. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Who else? Come on. What else is there? Questions? They're all frozen again. Can you hear me, you people? This is a terrible connection tonight. This is the worst it's ever been for 3 months. I'm so sorry. It must be my fault.
I have questions.
Any more questions?
Yes, this is Victor.
Talk to me.
Hi,
Hi, Victor.
how are you? I have a question. You keep mentioning clairvoyance. What's the significance? Thank you.
Honey, this is, yeah, the way that Buddhism talks about our mind and its capacity, you know, this is what the Indians found out more than 3,000 years ago, these genius Indians, who are the ones, as the Dalai Lama said, who first began into the nature of self. This model of the mind, I mean, Buddha didn't just make this up. It came from these Indians before him, and he ran with it. Mind is not physical. Mind has got these different levels of capacity for cognition. So the level that we function at and that we only ever posit is the grosser level, isn't it, of the sensory consciousness and mental consciousness at the level of conceptuality. But we've got these much subtler levels of mind when we get single point of concentration, which these Indians invented. We access this more subtle level. We go beyond the sensory and beyond the conceptual. And, you know, we subtle level, like, you know, where naturally this subtle level has to cognize phenomena that are more subtle. So when you've got the subtle level of mind and you've accomplished the single point of concentration, you can cognize the past, you can cognize the future, you can cognize the minds of others, because it's not hindered by the presence of the sensory and the gross level of mental consciousness. Does that make sense, Victor?
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
And so the point about it is, it sounds very exciting to be able to run around doing that. But the whole point in Buddhism is the only reason to have that is so that you can help sentient beings. So that's why you get these realizations and you add bodhicitta to the mix. The only reason you want to see the past and the future is to help other people, to know how to diagnose their problems and know how to help them perfectly. Do you understand?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Okay. One more question. Any more questions, Mary? No.
I do not see any in the chat. Anyone?
Okay. Well, we just touched on a few things very fast. I'm sorry if some of it made sense. I'm very happy. So just have to keep going. So maybe you have to have another class another time. We can go into more detail. Whatever. We'll see what happens. So this is everything in the path leads us to this. Get that idea. So by practicing understanding the laws of karma, you're leading yourself to realize emptiness. By practicing knowing your own mind, you're leading yourself towards emptiness. By practicing bodhicitta, you're leading towards emptiness. Everything is integrated. Everything is kind of, all the dots should join. So have confidence in that and just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. So a nice way to finish. One time His Holiness was asked, how do you apply emptiness in daily life? And it was so simple, his answer. He said, see things from another point of view. That's dependent arising. Things are not set in stone. See things from another point of view. This is profound. So we can do that every day. We can begin to realize dependent arising. We can begin to realize that things don't have an intrinsic nature, that things don't exist the way they seem to appear to us. We need to have with that view. This view keeps us sane. This view keeps us sane. The view of real, it is that, it's not my fault, how dare, that's what makes us insane. There's always another way to see things. That's powerful. So maybe all do that, okay? Maybe realize our true nature. So we can realize the nature of everybody. We'll mix that with emptiness and mix that with bodhicitta, then we become a Buddha. Okay. I'd read our prayers, Mary. Yeah, my connection is unstable, it says. It's so strange. First time ever. Don't know what the problem is. So we dedicate, thinking here it is in English, look, due to the merits of these virtuous actions, and what we mean is listening to these teachings. What merit means is all these thoughts we've had are we've sowed seeds in our mind. We've sown virtuous seeds. That's all it means. May I quickly attain the state of a Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. That was our motivation. So we're dedicating now this activity to that. And then may the supreme jewel bodhicitta, this amazing aspiration. Bodhicitta is not compassion, it's the result of compassion. And it's this outrageous aspiration to never give up helping sentient beings and never give up becoming a Buddha so you can lead them all to enlightenment. That's the meaning of bodhicitta. So may the supreme jewel bodhicitta, that has not arisen in the minds of other beings, may it arise and may it grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. So, okay, maybe we think, may all our lamas live a long life. Here we go. His Holiness. Lama Zopa wrote this new little prayer because the previous prayer, the normal one, is in the snow land of Tibet, but Lama Zopa says he's the king of the world. So he's changed the prayer. This wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjushri's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And may we all live long, and may all our teachers live long, so we can all practice virtue and help this crazy planet, okay? And never give up.
Thank you so much